The previous cosmology was not science and the modern cosmology is science.
You are very true. Science is a systematic pursuit of knowledge. Scientific knowledge does not get affected by our biases.
Conclusive.
Conclusion. You may call conclusion the best word. Then you send your research uh, in a certain document. We call it article, research paper, or maybe a book.
Sir, there is another question is that is astrology is also science?
That's an interesting question.
Oh,
Astronomy and cosmology are
different
synonymous
meaning. They have different meanings.
and are science. But astrology is not a science.
Stars have influence on human life.
Motion
right?
or location of the stars,
Locations of stars.
motions or locations of stars or collection of stars have influences on the human lives.
Dr. Zahid Mughal with me. Welcome to another podcast session. In today's session, we will discuss about the cosmology, science, and astrology. Again, Dr. Zahid Mughal with me. He is a cosmologist and mathematician. Sir, welcome to another podcast session. Sir, I am interested to know that about is cosmology science or not science?
A very interesting question you actually asked. Uh, in knowing that cosmology is a science, not only you, many other may be interested. Cosmology, as we have discussed in our previous podcasts, that it was developed by Einstein based on general relativity. By applying the cosmological principle along with the general relativity principles and Wales principle, the modern cosmology was established. So, cosmology, like physics, mathematics, chemistry, like physical sciences, is a physical science.
Oh, okay.
Actually, this modern cosmology is known as physical. So, when we prefix the word physical cosmology, it automatically gives the meaning of a science.
We should use here the physical cosmology and the modern cosmology.
Actually, modern means it was developed in 20th century based
Okay,
on general
okay.
relativity. The cosmology based on general relativity, on the principles of general relativity, is known as modern cosmology.
Is there we can say that the previous cosmology was not science and the modern cosmology is science?
You are very true. Actually, before general relativity emerged,
Okay, okay.
the cosmology was not actually established on the physical grounds, or you may say on the scientific method developed in about 17th century. However, you would not trust me just on the basis of my claim unless I show you that this science, this physical cosmology as a science, not only satisfies scientific method, rather it is providing the revolutionary information about the universe that is appealing to many for all of us. So I think in order to assert my claim that cosmology is a science, I have to apply the pure scientific method implemented by science to prove that cosmology is a science. And in this context, I consider it would be convenient to briefly revise what a science is and what is the scientific method. And you and all others are frequently using the word science.
Yeah,
You are also aware, all are aware in this present era, that science is a systematic pursuit of knowledge.
exactly.
It harbors and brings disciplined knowledge, which can predict, which can be tested, which can predict testable knowledge. This is the salient feature of the science, that the predictions and explanations of the science must be testable. However, briefly reviewing what the scientific method is that makes any subject a science. So, empiricism is the first basic principle of the scientific method. Empiricism, what we call in Urdu tajrabiyat.
Yeah.
Also, it is a branch of philosophy. However, science believes in empirical evidence. And you are well aware that empirical evidence in sciences is obtained through observation,
Experimental data.
observation, then searching out some certain patterns which may help out in the statement of a hypothesis.
Okay.
And hypothesis then is undergone through experimentation, and the results of experimentation are then further analyzed, and theory and towards the law we may step. Actually, empiricism, the first principle in scientific method, is a posteriori knowledge, or with the most known word we may call it induction.
Hmm.
This induction is in Urdu we call it as istikra,
Yes.
trikae istikra.
Yes. Yes.
In this induction or a posteriori knowledge, actually we base our findings on the observation, hypothesizing then, and then experimenting over this data. Secondly, the objectivity is the pillar of scientific method. Objectivity, you are will also be familiar with that, is what we in Urdu call maruziyat,
Ah, yes.
that scientific knowledge does not get affected by our biases, our opinions, our conditions, and whatever you may call. Objectivity is directly related to what we have discussed in our previous postcast about sense perception.
Yes.
Data collection through sense perception means that regardless of our existence, the outer reality is existing there.
Oh, yes.
Maruz, objective reality. So science believes that beyond this mind, beyond minds of each individual, the reality outside this mind as a physical world is existing per se,
Hmm.
fi nafsihi. And thirdly, which is the main and the most important part of this scientific method, is testability, as we mentioned earlier. Testability means that the scientific findings or our hypothesis must be testable by our methods we have already carved out. And based on this testing mechanism, the hypothesis can be accepted, improved, or rejected.
Hmm.
So, empiricism, which is based on sense perception, or you may call a posteriori knowledge or
Okay.
induction, and objectivity, and then, as we discussed, testability. And further three principles can be mentioned. However, they actually connotedly are included in first three, and those you can mention them. Repeatability.
Hmm.
Scientific findings can be repeated by any other person to
Yeah.
produce the results, same results. And another principle, which is very aesthetically beautiful principle, is parsimony, and it is based actually on the sentence you may call that nature is thrifty in all its
Ah, yeah.
actions.
Yes. Yes.
Sarfaju,
Yes.
nature actually is thrifty in all its actions. That the scientific statements are simple, elegant, and can be understandable, and are away from the unnecessary complexities, details whatsoever.
Okay.
For example, you are well aware that there are three laws of motion by Newton.
Yes.
The statements of the three laws of motion are the precise statements.
Exactly.
Everyone can't have doubt in understanding that what is related and what is irrelevant. So, parsimony, being thrifty, is also one of the principles of this scientific method. And lastly, and that is, I think, after once the research has been established and you are now going to get it published, and that
Yes.
is peer reviewing. Peer review. When you observed something, hypothesized, then you
Critical
experimented,
processes.
and then you moved forward to make a precise statement after analysis of
Like
the
a
data.
conclusion, conclusive.
Conclusion, you may call conclusion the best word. Then you send your research uh, in a certain document, we call it article, research paper, or maybe a book. A journal actually validate and get evaluated this research through the professionals of the same field. So unless they validate it, your research does not get published.
Mm.
So if a science, if a subject, if a discipline does satisfy these principles, then that is science. So cosmology, established based on general relativity, is a pure science who does work on the basis of scientific method. So is a science. So cosmology is not like the cosmology before general relativity.
Oh, yes.
This is based on general relativity and is physical cosmology.
Okay.
So
We can say that
I
cosmology is a pure science.
science.
Now I am able to say that the cosmology is a pure science. But sir, there is another question is that is astrology is also science?
That's an interesting question. Though the word may seem similar, synonymous, uh, actually you also may mention a word astronomy,
Yes,
which is similar to cosmology and is a science.
science.
So the words cosmology,
Astronomy,
astronomy, and astrology
astrology.
are appearing synonymous, but they are not.
Oh,
Astronomy and cosmology are
different meaning.
synonymous
They have different meanings.
and are science. But astrology is not a science. And now I can ask you, and retortedly, I can ask the question from you that based on the mentioned scientific method, what do you consider is whether astrology might be a science or non-science?
Yes,
Because astrology is based on the uh, positions, locations, movements of stars or collection of stars. There
exactly.
are 12 shapes that the experts in this field talk about. And they believe that these collection of stars actually have influences on human lives. But
Stars have influence on human life. Is it
motion
right?
or location of the stars,
Locations of stars.
motions or locations of stars or collection of stars have influences on the human lives. But supporting this claim, they are unable to provide any scientific evidence. I mean to say that they they are unable to satisfy the steps of scientific method, and that is the lack of empirical evidence. For example, an astrologist predicted that the life of a certain human being will be of this type
Yes.
or undergo such circumstances, and it is fulfilled. But when the same thing is repeated or believed in the perspective of some other person, it doesn't come true.
Hmm.
So lack of repeatability, empiricism, objectivity, and predictability all are lacking in this astrology,
Make it a non-science.
which means that astrology does not satisfy scientific method, and therefore it can be called as a semi science or a general discipline like other Urdu or other maybe.
We can say that it is a source of the knowledge, but not science or a
Actually, it is a
semi-science,
conventional, traditional way of
traditional
looking
knowledge.
the from the past, looking on the things from the past. However, its predictions are not evidence based, are not scientific, because you require the empiricism
Empiricism. Okay.
that implements observation, hypothesizing, making hypotheses, experimentation, analysis, and results, then theory, and then law, you may say. So, in all this, this discipline astrology lacks. So, it's not a
Exactly.
science.
Okay. You have described very deeply about the science, cosmology, and astrology. Thank you, sir. We have learned about the cosmology, astrology, and science. And in next session, we will continue with this topic soon.
Thing.
Thank you. Thank you for watching this podcast.